Hi all, DT Neil here, talking about writerly things, thoughts, stories, storytelling, philosophy, and the like. One thing that I've really thought about a lot in the last 15 years, sorry, long time, is the battle, the undeclared war, I guess, of rationality versus irrationality. And I think it's important because we have seen, especially with the advent of social media, a preponderance of irrationality, just overwhelming rationality. Now, other words get used. You have people speaking about their truths, right? Their truth. I'm speaking my truth, which is really a way of buffing up one's own opinion. It's my truth, because people aren't comfortable saying it's my opinion. They want to buttress it up with this idea of truth. Who doesn't love truth, right? But we are in this age where truth itself is being attacked in so many ways. It's very postmodern. The idea of, well, it's just differing opinions. Every truth is rooted in opinion. But I'm like, no, it's not actually true. And for me, the dividing line between those things is rationality versus irrationality. And in our world, it's kind of like and I've said this elsewhere, that the villain is the hero of their own story. I think I've said that on another post earlier. And we run into a situation where people's irrationality, they like to pretend is itself rational, or they want to think that their supposed rationality isn't irrational. And there's a problem there. The absence of critical thinking on the part of people is a problem, because somebody who's not well versed in their own reasons behind their thoughts and what they're thinking about, people who aren't very self-reflective or introspective, people who can't have no internal monologue, they are people ill-equipped to understand rationality versus irrationality. For a lot of people, I think they just want something, and that's about as far as they take it in terms of their thought process. I want this, and for them that's a rational thing. I want this. And it's not actually rational. And that's how people get themselves into trouble. And then they wonder, how did I get into this situation? How did this happen? This is a problem. And again, this is one of those things from a writerly perspective that I think about a lot, because I deal with characters and worlds and consequences and themes and background and decision-making characters. And I think about that a lot in terms of like, well, what is driving this character's actions? Are they rational actions or are they irrational? And how comfortable with that is a person? So moving forward in this incredibly perilous time, I think it's important to take a step back and assess the rationality or irrationality of one's decisions or someone else's decisions and how they're arriving at those things. It requires more work. It's more involved than perhaps a lot of people. Like the knee-jerk kind of emotional response to something, where somebody just pushes your button and you just immediately react to that. There's a certain, probably a dopamine hit or a serotonin hit that can result from somebody just being triggered and engaging emotionally with something without having necessarily done the mental legwork of a rational thought process. But for your own purposes, I think really understanding rationality versus irrationality, I think, is important, because the people, the architects of irrationality, which is itself paradoxical, I suppose, they don't like the idea of rational thought, of people logically thinking things through and arriving at informed and educated decisions on what they do. They don't like that. They just want to throw everything off the table and just say, you can't figure it out. There's no way of knowing. Both sides are right. There's a lot of dodges people can take: rhetorical dodges, mental dodges, emotional dodges. But when push really does come to shove, there are rational and irrational things. You could look at something like poverty in American society, and the irrational response is always going to be poverty, nothing we can do about it, and any effort to change it is just wrong, and we're always going to be stuck with it. Always going to be rich people, always going to be poor people. However, the more rational approach to something like that is to look at the policies a country does, specifically in American society, and what tends to lift people up and what tends to keep people down. It's not like it's just coming down from the heavens, this social arrangement. Rather, it's the result of policies. In the 1950s, the U.S. had like a 90% tax rate on the top 1%. A 90% tax rate. Can you even imagine that nowadays? And the huge middle class boom that arose in the United States in like the 1960s was a result of that tax policy. Okay? And that's part of the thing that needs to be dealt with. Excuse me, I'm congested. But that embracing of rationality is our way out of the traps that we find ourselves in not giving in to the irrational, right? The irrational who just don't want any solutions. They don't want anything that will otherwise impede their irrationality, okay? Whereas rational processes, and again, thinking back on that 1950s 90% tax rate on the top 1%, did that destroy America? Was America destroyed by that? Because today, the irrational hornblowers for the top 1% would scream. They would scream to the rafters, scream to the skies that you can't, raise taxes on the rich. Can't do it. Can't do it. Could never be done. It'll destroy America. But our country did have that policy in place before it was undone by greedy opportunists and corrupt opportunists who had an agenda to get themselves more money at the expense of everybody else. That's a rational, looking at that from a rational perspective and saying, well, policies can be changed. If our society wants to solve XYZ problem, we can change policy to reflect that. And again, the irrational will attack that notion and just say, that's not possible, can't do it. Just got to pray to God, and it's all part of his master plan. Or one could pursue a rational policy that recognizes everyone in American society in this collective whole, WHOL, although one could say it HOLE too, as we're all in this together as a society, as a civilization. And the rational approach would be to pursue policies that help the largest number of people live as well as they possibly can with the minimal amount of disruption. And the irrational response is to continue doing what we're doing, where 1% gets more than they could ever have in their entire lifetimes, and 99% are left out in the weeds. That's a recipe for societal collapse. That is a rational assessment of the situation. The irrational assessment is that this can continue indefinitely, because it can't. It cannot. So, as people think about in the next several years, what they're going to do, what needs to be done, I think rationality needs to get dusted off, and irrationality needs to be sent off to where it doesn't have that impact on public policy. Irrationality is a problem. I could go on and on and on about it. Things like disinformation, misinformation, outright lies, etc., etc. Those are willful irrationalities that are inflicted on the rest of us that are intended to shape and frame our world to prevent progress and change from occurring. So as you face what's going on around you day to day, think about rationality versus irrationality. Take some time to think about that and look at something and just weigh it for yourself. Figure it out based on the evidence. What's a rational course of action and what is an irrational course of action?